talked earlier about an organization called the Council on Foreign Relations. It's a very dangerous organization whose not so publicly stated goal, but it is their goal, is to bring down borders and to create regional governing arrangements. And by that, the best example existing right now is the European Union. First it started with trade agreements, European versions of NAFTA, GATT, CAFTA, Free Trade Area of the Americas. They were doing this in Europe. And then they created a common currency. They called it the euro. And then finally they said, well, we have an economic union. The natural thing to follow would be a political union. And hence the European Union was born. A lot of people were kept in the dark about what this was going to lead to. A few countries decided that no, they didn't want to be a part of a European Union, and so they said no, and they didn't want to sign off on this European Constitution. And that caused some other countries to reconsider, and it kind of stalled momentum, but the organization exists. It is a de facto government. Now they're trying to do the same thing here. Again, I mentioned NAFTA, GATT, Free Trade Area of the Americas. You have an organization called WTO, the World Trade Organization. And I'll kind of get into that and some of the protests against globalization in places like Seattle and Florida. The Miami area is a particularly unknown event. It's not like what happened up in Seattle, but what happened was nonetheless significant. So they have a new currency available. It's called the Amero. The Treasury Department just shipped, and I believe the bailout bill has been described in varying amounts: 700 billion, 840 billion, 1.25 trillion. But I find it interesting that as soon as the bailout bill passed, 840 billion Ameros were shipped to China, just within the last few days. Now, this Amero obviously refers to, if you look at any coin, and I'll get out one of these Indian dollars that I have, it'll say, and I'm going to look on the back side here, it says United States of America, $1. The Amero, the primary unit Amero, looks a lot like this, except it doesn't have an eagle, which is required by federal law on our coins. It says Union of North America, 1 Amero. And Google that and check it out. You will see what it looks like. I unfortunately don't have I didn't get that downloaded. But the Amero is the currency of the North American Union. Bush secretly met with the President of Mexico and Prime Minister of Canada back in 2005, right about the time everyone was worried about Katrina hitting. They were having their little secret summit where they agreed to a security and prosperity partnership. This is the blueprint for the North American Union. And this blueprint was in turn derived from a Council on Foreign Relations document called Building a North American Community. It is the roadmap to the New World Order. And this CFR document can be downloaded off the web. It's a lot to read, but if you take the time to study it, you will find what they're talking about is the abolition of borders. And in fact, that kind of ties in with the illegal immigration crisis. We heard a lot about that in the last few years. We've got a lot of people that are not Americans coming across our borders. Well, even before this deal was done with Bush, there was talk about, well, we can't enforce our own borders. Why don't we just do away with them? Let Mexicans come up in the United States the way Canadians can come into the United States. We're talking about people that have no documentation. It's not like they've got a Canadian passport and they're just stopping at the toll booth. The purpose of abolishing the borders is that a nation that has no borders has no sovereignty. And that's what they're talking about doing. This proposal is to submerge the United States Constitution and our Bill of Rights under a regional governing agreement. Now, Mexico, a lot of people understand, the government there is thoroughly corrupt. There is no accountability. Kidnapping and other crimes in Mexico run rampant and unpunished for the most part because everyone's on the take. It's virtually, a national pastime there. Canada, on the other hand, has a parliamentarian form of government, and it is not the Republican form of government that our founding fathers gave to us. And so you have two different countries, other than ours, with two completely different forms of government, both of which are incompatible with our Constitution. In order to merge the three countries together, you have to do away with the existing structures, and that is part of the CFR plan. So that's where we're headed with that. Now, I know what you're thinking. There ain't no way we're going to let that stand. I hear the same thing from a lot of gun owners. They say, if they come for my guns to confiscate my guns, well, I'll give them my guns bullets first. Now, that's all nice talk. It's lovely rhetoric. But the problem is that you honestly don't know what you're going to do until you're faced with that situation. And they're actually counting that a lot of people won't do anything. That when they do away with that, that people won't stand up and get angry and do something about it. But let's assume that people do say, this won't fly, and actually do something about it. I would love to be able to bring a fantastic lady here to Indiana to speak to people here by the name of Naomi Wolf. She wrote this book called The End of America, A Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot. There's even a video by the same name. You can get it online, and I believe you can even download it if you pay electronically. Basically, and I'll just run through the 10 points here, and then I'll get into it in a little bit more detail. Basically, she said that all you need to destroy a democracy and to create a fascist police state is 10 little steps. Now, being a historian, I certainly can only agree with her in the strongest of terms. She gave herself a crash course in history as well, and came to the conclusion of these 10 steps. Certainly this was the case in the Soviet Union, in China, in Germany, in Italy, and a lot of other countries where people were at one time free and then found themselves living under the most brutal conditions. So we'll just run through it. It's not Dave Letterman, but here's the 10 list. 1, invoke a terrifying internal and external enemy. This has been going on for years. We're told that we have to surrender our freedom because there are sleeper cells, domestic radicals, extremists, etc. So all these enemies, and we don't know who they are because they look just like you. So we're going to treat you just like the rest of them. Create secret prisons where torture takes place. There's been a lot of news on the internet about, and very little of this really does get into the mainstream media. CIA black sites in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East. Violations, of course, of habeas corpus even before it was thrown out the window entirely. The Military Commissions Act, which I referenced to earlier. 3, develop a thug caste or a paramilitary force not answerable to citizens. Now here I'm just going to stop and feel free to raise your hand and answer this. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a mercenary or paramilitary force?
Blackwater.
Blackwater. In the video of Naomi Wolf's presentation, that was the first thing that came to mind with everyone too. They are the new Hessians. Now, if you know your history about Mr. Washington and his little trip across the Delaware, visited a little town called Trenton, ran in a whole bunch of Hessians. They were hired by the British military to act as security contractors